January 1945. A pale winter sun struggled through the clouds over northern Germany. The landscape was scarred, bombed-out buildings, broken fences, and frozen mud fields stretching as far as the eye could see. Inside a makeshift POW camp, wooden barracks leaned under the weight of snow, their windows frosted, rattling in the bitter wind. British soldiers moved in patrol, boots crunching on the frozen ground, rifles slung over their shoulders, breaths misting in the cold air. Among the prisoners, a German woman wrapped in a thin, worn coat shuffled along the gravel path, her eyes wide with apprehension. A soldier reached forward, his hand gripping the edge of her dress to steady her, or perhaps to assert control in the tense uncertainty of the moment. She froze, the fabric taut between them, and the air seemed to shiver with silent accusation. Around them, the camp carried its usual sounds, dogs barking, distant orders shouted, the clatter of metal doors. Fear, confusion, and unspoken tension hung in the air, thick as the winter fog. This singular moment, small yet charged, would ripple far beyond the frozen barracks, echoing through the harsh realities of occupation. By early 1945, Germany was a nation in collapse. Allied bombers had reduced cities to rubble, rail lines were torn apart, and winter added a relentless weight to an already shattered landscape. Civilians scavenged for food, and the social fabric was stretched to its limits. The Nazi regime had begun to crumble, but remnants of the Wehrmacht still resisted, and the front lines crept steadily westward. British forces had advanced through Belgium and the Netherlands, pressing toward the Rhine, and their eyes were set on the eventual occupation of northern Germany. In this chaotic environment, the handling of prisoners of war became a delicate but crucial task. British units, under strict orders from the War Office and Geneva Convention protocols, were responsible for capturing, housing, and processing enemy combatants. The logistics were immense. Makeshift camps were constructed in commandeered barracks, factories, and even open fields. Food and clothing were rationed, often barely sufficient for basic survival. Female prisoners, while fewer in number than men, presented unique challenges. Guards were instructed to treat them with dignity, but the reality of war, exhaustion, and proximity often tested discipline. Tensions simmered on both sides. Prisoners feared reprisals, interrogation, or simply the uncertainty of life behind barbed wire. Soldiers, many of them young men in their late teens or early 20s, grappled with a mix of curiosity, authority, and the psychological strain of witnessing the devastation of a defeated nation. Every interaction was layered, commands had to be issued clearly, punishments administered fairly, and yet the human instinct for empathy or misjudgment lingered in the cold barracks. The British command emphasized the importance of decorum, but isolated incidents, miscommunications, and cultural misunderstandings were inevitable. The physical environment only heightened these tensions. Barracks were overcrowded, floors icy, and hygiene difficult to maintain. Guards patrolled in layers of winter clothing, their boots crunching against snow and ice, eyes scanning for signs of unrest. Prisoners, often in inadequate uniforms or civilian clothes, moved cautiously, aware of every gaze. A single gesture, a raised voice, a sudden touch, a misinterpreted action, could spark confrontation. In this fragile ecosystem of authority and fear, every small encounter was magnified, every decision scrutinized. And so, the moment when a soldier reached for a prisoner's dress was not merely about control, it was the intersection of military procedure, human instinct, and the extraordinary pressures of war. This fragile balance, poised between discipline and chaos, set the stage for the incidents that would ripple beyond the immediate confines of the camp, revealing both the rigor and the fragility of wartime occupation. Inside the camps, the psychological landscape was as treacherous as the winter terrain outside. Soldiers, many of them freshly arrived from the battlefields of France or the Low Countries, faced an uneasy mix of boredom, vigilance, and moral ambiguity. Their daily routines, roll calls, inspections, and patrols, were punctuated by the constant reminder of human suffering. The German prisoners, particularly women, carried their own invisible burdens, fear of retribution, separation from families, and the humiliation of captivity. Every glance, every gesture, carried weight beyond its apparent meaning. British military culture emphasized order and discipline, yet it was built atop human imperfections. Young officers were trained to enforce regulations, but fatigue, the harsh climate, and the stress of managing large groups of captives created gaps where misjudgments could occur. Ethical dilemmas were common. How to maintain authority without cruelty? How to balance empathy with duty? These questions were never abstract, they were lived realities with consequences. The Geneva Conventions provided guidance, but the lived experience of occupation often blurred the line between rule and improvisation. There were precedents for these interactions. Across Europe, accounts recorded incidents of minor confrontations, verbal disputes, accidental touches, or gestures misread by either side. Some officers noted that female POWs often inspired protective instincts among guards, leading to interventions that ranged from simple assistance to overstepping boundaries. In rare instances, misunderstandings became documented events, prompting reviews or minor disciplinary measures. Historians later noted that such moments, while seemingly small, revealed the deeper human tension of occupying a defeated population. The social fabric of the camp was fragile. Gossip spread quickly, amplifying fear and suspicion. Prisoners observed soldiers' behavior constantly, searching for signals of kindness, aggression, or unpredictability. Guards, in turn, remained aware that any lapse could escalate into insubordination or scandal. This dynamic created a charged atmosphere where even a brief physical interaction, a tug at a coat, a gesture meant to steady someone, could carry significance far beyond its immediate context. Within this environment, the seemingly simple act of a soldier reaching for the edge of a prisoner's dress became emblematic. It symbolized the tension between authority and humanity, control and vulnerability. In the frozen barracks, under the watchful eyes of both captors and captives, every movement was observed, every decision weighed, and every action, however small, could resonate far beyond its immediate moment. The stage was now set, the physical, psychological, and cultural pressures converged, making the lines between duty, instinct, and morality increasingly blurred. And it was against this backdrop that the actions of one soldier would draw attention, raise questions, and leave a mark on the memory of those present. Human angle. The interaction between the British soldier and the German POW was more than a procedural moment, it was a collision of human emotions under extreme conditions. For the woman, fear surged immediately, a reflex sharpened by weeks of deprivation and uncertainty. Each gesture by a soldier was magnified, a hand on her dress could feel like dominance, protection, or threat, depending on the context. The soldier, for his part, navigated a complex psychological landscape. Years of combat, exposure to death and destruction, and the daily strain of authority created a tension that could make even minor actions feel consequential. Both were acutely aware of the power imbalance, yet both were human beings caught in the machinery of war, their responses shaped by instinct, training, and the weight of circumstance. Tactical angle. From a tactical standpoint, handling female prisoners required a careful balance. British military doctrine emphasized strict control to prevent escape, disorder, or confrontation, while adhering to international law. Patrol routes were designed to minimize unsupervised encounters, officers issued protocols to ensure prisoners moved in groups and remained visible to guards. Even a seemingly small act, touching a dress to steady a prisoner, was scrutinized within this framework, as it could compromise security or escalate tension. Officers were trained to anticipate incidents, but human unpredictability meant that every interaction carried potential risk. This constant vigilance created a rigid operational environment in which small gestures assumed outsized significance. Technological/logistical angle. The camps themselves reflected the logistical challenges of wartime occupation. Barracks were hastily converted from schools, factories, or abandoned military facilities. Surveillance relied on guards stationed at checkpoints, watchtowers, and interior patrols, rather than sophisticated technology. Uniforms and clothing regulations distinguished soldiers from prisoners, yet they also reinforced psychological hierarchies. POWs often wore mismatched or inadequate garments, making them vulnerable to the cold and emphasizing their subjugation. The combination of improvised infrastructure and minimal technological support heightened the potential for misunderstandings. Even a gesture intended for safety could be misinterpreted, amplified by the surrounding tension and sparse supervision. The intersection of human psychology, tactical procedure, and logistical reality transformed simple interactions into moments of high significance. What might have been a fleeting touch or a stabilizing gesture became a nexus of fear, authority, and observation, a moment whose reverberations extended beyond the immediate camp, illustrating the fragile balance of power and morality in wartime occupation. Leadership/command angle. Officers faced the constant challenge of maintaining order while enforcing discipline in a morally and psychologically complex environment. British commanders were tasked with interpreting international law, regulating soldier behavior, and preventing incidents that could undermine authority or provoke scandal. Decisions about punishment, reporting, or intervention were carefully weighed. Even minor breaches, such as a soldier touching a prisoner's clothing, could prompt formal inquiries. Commanders relied on clear chains of responsibility, but human judgment always played a role. Leadership, therefore, was not only about enforcing rules but also about managing perception, maintaining morale, and balancing strict discipline with the unpredictable dynamics of occupation life. Enemy/cultural angle. German prisoners and civilians viewed the occupation through lenses shaped by fear, resentment, and cultural misunderstanding. Female POWs were acutely aware of their vulnerability in the camps. To them, a gesture from a soldier could be comforting or threatening, protective or humiliating. Civilians watching from nearby towns interpreted interactions based on rumor and limited observation, often coloring the incident with assumptions or exaggeration. These cultural dynamics heightened tension and created a feedback loop. Soldiers' cautious behavior was scrutinized, prisoners' reactions were amplified, and the camp atmosphere became charged with mutual suspicion. Moral/ethical angle. The ethical dimension of occupation was ever present. Soldiers were trained to uphold the Geneva Conventions, but the stress of war, exposure to suffering, and the inherent imbalance of power complicated moral judgment. Was it acceptable to physically steady a prisoner, knowing it could be misinterpreted? Could authority coexist with empathy in a context defined by control and fear? Ethical dilemmas were rarely theoretical, they unfolded in real time, in frozen barracks and muddy compounds, with consequences for all involved. These moments revealed the tension between duty and conscience, law and instinct, authority and humanity. Together, these angles demonstrate that the incident of the soldier and the prisoner was never an isolated event. It was shaped by leadership decisions, cultural perceptions, and moral ambiguity, each layer adding complexity to an already fraught situation. In the cold barracks and under watchful eyes, every action carried significance, setting the stage for the unfolding climax, a turning point where rules, humanity, and circumstance collided in ways that would reverberate far beyond the camp itself. It was January 17, 1945, a bitter morning in a British-occupied POW camp near Bremen. Snow crusted the gravel pathways, and the wooden barracks groaned under the weight of ice. Corporal James Whittaker, a 23-year-old British soldier, was conducting a routine inspection of the prisoners' exercise yard when his attention fell on a young German woman, Ingrid Bauer, moving unsteadily over the uneven ground. Bauer, in her late 20s, wore a thin dress over a threadbare coat, her hands clutching a small bundle of personal belongings. The winter wind tugged at her garments, and her boots slipped on the icy surface. Whittaker reached out, gripping the edge of her dress, whether to steady her or assert authority is unclear. The motion was brief, yet instantaneous tension rippled through the camp. Bauer froze, eyes wide with alarm, her body instinctively recoiling. Nearby prisoners whispered, some scowling, others biting their lips in nervous silence. Fellow soldiers paused mid-step, observing the interaction with a mixture of caution and curiosity. For a fleeting moment, the camp seemed suspended between order and chaos, the frozen air thick with apprehension. The consequences were immediate. Officers stationed in the watchtower noticed the incident, signaling for an inquiry. Bauer was escorted to the infirmary, not for injury but to ensure she was calm and unthreatened. Soldiers whispered among themselves, debating whether Whitaker had violated protocol or acted prudently under difficult conditions. Rumors circulated quickly, some painted the gesture as protective, others as overreach, or worse. Tension surged within the barracks, prisoners huddled together, sharing stories, while guards grew hyper-aware of their own conduct. The delicate equilibrium of authority, fear, and human emotion had been jolted, leaving everyone in the camp alert to the possibility of further incidents. The incident was small in scale yet disproportionate in significance. Within the rigid confines of camp life, such gestures were magnified, becoming symbols of broader struggles, the tension between authority and humanity, between discipline and instinct. Whitaker's single action became a focal point, a prism through which the complexities of occupation life were refracted. It was no longer merely a routine day in the camp, it had become a moment that demanded scrutiny, reflection, and response, setting in motion a chain of reactions that would extend far beyond the snowy yard where it occurred. The incident quickly reached the attention of camp officers. Lieutenant Harold Chambers, responsible for maintaining discipline, called for formal statements from both Corporal Whitaker and Ingrid Bauer. Whitaker described the act as a reflexive gesture, meant solely to steady the prisoner on the icy ground. Bauer, meanwhile, recounted the encounter with palpable unease, emphasizing the shock and fear she felt in the moment. Other prisoners were questioned as witnesses, their testimonies revealing the atmosphere of heightened tension within the camp and the uncertainty that permeated every interaction. Reports were filed meticulously, following British military procedure. Officers debated whether the gesture constituted a breach of protocol or a moment of necessary intervention. Some argued that in the harsh conditions of winter, minor physical assistance was inevitable and did not indicate misconduct. Others raised concerns about precedent, emphasizing that any contact between soldiers and female POWs could be misinterpreted, potentially undermining discipline and international obligations. This dialogue reflected broader anxieties in occupied Germany, the fine line between authority and empathy, and the scrutiny placed on even small actions in the charged environment of a POW camp. The wider implications soon became evident. Policies were reviewed regarding the handling of female prisoners, with clearer directives issued to prevent misinterpretation of gestures. Officers were reminded to enforce strict oversight during outdoor movement, ensuring that all interactions were observable and sanctioned. Whitaker was formally counseled but not punished, his actions deemed understandable given the circumstances. Yet the emotional impact lingered. Bauer remained wary of guards, while soldiers became more conscious of their physical presence, aware that even routine gestures could spark controversy. The incident also drew attention outside the camp. Intelligence officers and higher command monitored reports for signs of broader disciplinary issues or potential propaganda exploitation. Locally, civilians observed rumors of the event, reinforcing the perception of British authority being both protective and invasive. For historians later examining the episode, the event illustrated the intricate dynamics of occupation, how minor physical interactions, shaped by stress, environmental conditions, and human instinct, could ripple outward, affecting policy, morale, and the perception of justice. This moment, the grabbing of a dress in the frozen morning light, served as a turning point, crystallizing the tension between military duty and human instinct, authority and empathy. It was a flashpoint that highlighted vulnerabilities on all sides, the fragility of discipline, the psychological strain on soldiers, the precarious position of prisoners, and the ever-present gaze of both history and contemporaries. In the aftermath, both procedure and perception would be forever altered, setting the stage for the consequences that would follow. The immediate consequences of the incident were felt by all involved. For Ingrid Bauer, the experience left an indelible mark of fear and vigilance. Though physically unharmed, she carried the tension of that frozen moment with her, retreating into a cautious silence around the guards. Fellow prisoners noted her increased wariness, observing how even minor interactions with soldiers elicited visible apprehension. For the camp's male POWs, the event became a cautionary tale. Gestures could be magnified, authority could shift suddenly, and the line between safety and intimidation was fragile. Corporal James Whitaker faced formal counseling from his superiors. Though his actions were ultimately deemed understandable given the icy conditions and the intention to prevent a fall, the review emphasized restraint, proper procedure, and awareness of perception. The incident was meticulously recorded in the camp's field reports, detailing the date, time, participants, and witness accounts. These documents were later cited in internal reviews of POW management and contributed to broader evaluations of occupation conduct. The camp itself felt the ripple effects. Guards became more circumspect in their patrols, conscious that every gesture might be observed and interpreted. Officers held discussions reinforcing strict adherence to protocol, while prisoners noted a subtle tightening of surveillance during outdoor activities. The incident also reached nearby civilians, whose curiosity and rumor-mongering amplified the perception of tension within the camp. Letters from local residents to military authorities expressed concern for prisoner welfare, highlighting the delicate balance between authority and humanity. The winter barracks, once a place of routine control, had been transformed, briefly, into a site of heightened psychological awareness, where every action was weighed, recorded, and scrutinized. In this way, what seemed a minor gesture, a hand on the edge of a dress, became emblematic of the complexities of occupation. Immediate consequences encompassed both the personal and institutional, the emotional impact on the woman, the formal review for the soldier, and the operational adjustments within the camp. These responses reflected the dual priorities of maintaining security and preserving ethical conduct, revealing how singular moments could resonate through both human experience and military administration. Beyond the immediate consequences, the incident had broader implications for wartime occupation and the handling of prisoners. British military authorities used the episode as a case study in the subtleties of POW management, particularly regarding female prisoners. Policies were clarified, all interactions with prisoners had to be visible to multiple witnesses, physical contact was to be minimized unless strictly necessary, and officers were reminded to enforce these standards consistently. These adjustments reflected a growing awareness of the psychological dimension of captivity, as well as the need to prevent incidents that could be exploited for propaganda or spark unrest within camps. The ethical considerations raised by the event also left a lasting imprint. Soldiers were confronted with the tension between exercising authority and maintaining humanity, between following orders and responding to immediate human needs. While the Geneva Conventions provided formal guidelines, the lived reality of occupied camps required judgment and moral discretion. The incident illustrated the challenge of applying broad regulations to specific, high-pressure situations, and prompted reflection on the importance of ethical training alongside tactical instruction. Public perception and historical memory were subtly influenced. Civilians, both within Germany and among Allied observers, interpreted the event as a microcosm of occupation dynamics, the exercise of authority intertwined with the vulnerability of the powerless. POW testimonies and later memoirs highlighted the incident as emblematic of the complex human interactions that defined camp life. Historians have noted that small, charged moments like these illuminate broader truths about wartime behavior, revealing how fear, empathy, and protocol coexist in uneasy balance. Ultimately, the dress incident underscored that even minor gestures can have amplified significance in a wartime context. It catalyzed procedural adjustments, shaped soldier behavior, and provided a lens through which the ethical and human dimensions of occupation could be studied. From the frozen barracks near Bremen to military headquarters and beyond, the echoes of that brief interaction reverberated, leaving lessons about vigilance, morality, and the fragile interplay between authority and humanity, lessons that extended far beyond the immediate confines of the camp itself. The incident of a British soldier grasping the dress of a German woman POW stands as a quiet yet profound testament to the complexities of war. On the surface, it was a fleeting gesture in a frozen barracks yard, a moment measured in seconds. Yet beneath that instant lay layers of fear, authority, human instinct, and moral ambiguity. It reminds us that warfare is not only fought on battlefields but in the small, human interactions that unfold in the shadow of destruction. History often records the grand movements of armies, the strategies of commanders, and the outcomes of battles. But events like this reveal the subtle, human dimensions of conflict, the psychological strain on soldiers, the vulnerability of the occupied, and the fragile balance between duty and conscience. They illuminate how ordinary acts, whether protective, inadvertent, or misinterpreted, carry weight far beyond their immediate context. In reflecting on this moment, we see how morality and authority coexist uneasily in wartime. Soldiers navigated not only the external threats of a collapsing enemy but also the internal pressures of ethical decision-making and human empathy. Prisoners, meanwhile, experienced the war in its most personal form, through the eyes, gestures, and decisions of those who held their fate in temporary hands. Ultimately, the frozen morning near Bremen is emblematic of the broader human story of World War II. It underscores that history is shaped as much by individual choices as by grand strategies. And in these choices, we find enduring lessons about vigilance, empathy, and the responsibility of power, even amid the harshest trials of war.